Picture this, September 1st, 1948. A deed gets signed in the San Fernando Valley for the first home in a community called Panorama City. Just ranch land and sheep herders watching construction crews from a distance. Fast forward 7 years, and that same dusty landscape has transformed into something America had never seen before. 2,000 identical homes stretching toward the horizon. Chrome bumpers gleaming in every driveway. Families gathering under starlight at the local drive-in, watching the silver screen from the comfort of their brand-new automobiles. This wasn't just development. This was revolution wrapped in conformity, rebellion disguised as the American dream. Before you dive deeper into this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we're about to take you back to the decade that literally built modern America, one tract home and hot rod at a time. You won't want to miss what comes next. The war was over. Boys were coming home. And America had a problem it actually wanted to have. Nowhere near enough houses for all those returning veterans ready to start families and claim their piece of prosperity. The San Fernando Valley became ground zero for the solution. Legendary real estate developer Fritz B. Burns partnered with industrialist Henry Kaiser to create something unprecedented. Entire towns built from scratch, complete with commercial districts, land reserved for schools, parks, and medical centers. Panorama City wasn't just a housing development. It was a template for the future. Ken Skinner, who worked as a teenager for Burns as a bookkeeper, later recalled, "There was just nothing out there back then. Sheep herders used to come by and watch the construction. The houses went up at an astonishing rate, sometimes 40 in a single day. Pre-cut materials, assembly line efficiency applied to residential construction. Every home had the same basic one-story plan with a garage at one end. The fronts got flipped and reconfigured to disguise the sameness, but make no mistake, these were mass-produced dwellings. The first home was given away in a contest on the national broadcast of the People Are Funny radio show. That's how they marketed the dream. Entertainment, spectacle, the promise of winning something better than what you had. Sales started slow. The location felt too remote, too rural. Burns himself moved into one of those 1,000-square-foot homes and personally oversaw sales operations. Then the General Motors plant opened in Van Nuys and everything changed. Some salesmen boasted of selling more than 20 homes in a single day. The shopping center that Burns and Kaiser built was lavish for its time, drawing customers from across the entire valley. Life magazine featured Panorama City as a model suburb, celebrating it as the alternative to crowded, dingy cities. That publicity popularized the valley and spurred development in areas once considered too remote for viable suburbs. The 1950s set the pace for valley development more than any other decade. The population exploded from about 403,000 in 1950 to more than 840,000 by 1960. The valley had transformed from ranchland to Los Angeles's most emblematic suburb in less than a generation. Across California, land values in suburban neighborhoods increased rapidly. In some prime areas, values jumped as much as 3,000%. Population in these new suburbs swelled by 45% during the decade. Nearly two-thirds of all industrial construction during the 50s took place outside cities. Residential construction in the suburbs accounted for an astonishing 75% of total construction. This wasn't organic growth. This was engineered transformation fueled by government-backed home ownership programs, the GI Bill, and the Federal Highway Act of 1956 that created the freeway system connecting these new communities to urban job centers. But suburbia wasn't just about houses. It was about lifestyle. Backyard cookouts became formal affairs. Dad wore slacks and polished loafers to flip burgers. Mom brought Jell-O salads with pineapple rings suspended in lime green gelatin. Hawaiian shirts were everywhere, even though most of these families had never been to Hawaii. The aesthetic was aspirational, borrowed from vacation fantasies and magazine spreads. Kids played in fallout shelters that doubled as storage for Christmas decorations. It was the Cold War but suburban style. The nuclear family in every sense of the word. Father, mother, 2.5 kids, and a bunker in the backyard just in case the Soviets decided to end the party. The driveway was status symbol and stage. What you parked there mattered. And what some young Californians parked there was about to change American culture forever. The origin of the term hot rod remains unclear, but the culture exploded in the post-war climate of the 1950s. Hot Rod magazine's November 1950 cover announced the first hot rod to exceed 200 miles per hour. The handcrafted car used an Edelbrock-built Mercury flathead V8 engine and set the record at the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. That 30,000-acre region of hard-packed salt became known as the holy grail of American hot rodding, a tradition that grew rapidly through the decade and continues today. This wasn't new behavior. In the late 1930s, automotive enthusiasts known as hot rodders began customizing their cars and informally meeting at local drive-in stands to show off their souped-up creations. They'd issue the challenge, "You want a race?" The response, "Let's drag it out," which meant finding some side street and getting it on to see whose car was fastest. By the late 30s, Ernie McAfee was breaking speed records driving his torpedo-shaped modified Ford out on the Muroc Dry Lake beds, 50 miles north of Los Angeles. Though remote, those smooth, flat surfaces proved ideal for amateur drivers to host time trials that quantified who could build the fastest car. During World War II, the hot rod action moved from Muroc to the El Mirage Dry Lakes in the high desert county of San Bernardino. Then came the crucial turning point. In 1951, Wally Parks, co-founder and first editor of Hot Rod magazine who was also instrumental in founding Motor Trend magazine, began an effort to get hot rodders off the streets and into controlled environments where they could safely race. Thus began the National Hot Rod Association, the NHRA. Following the war, many small military airports around Southern California lay abandoned or rarely used. Their runways were easily, often clandestinely, repurposed to allow races on a marked quarter-mile course, with up to 4 lanes side by side. On June 19, 1950, C.J. Pappy Hart, his wife Peggy Creighton Hunter, and Frank Stillwell opened the Santa Ana drag strip on an unused runway at the Orange County Airport. It became the first commercially operated drag strip in Southern California and quickly gained popularity with the El Mirage crowd because of its revolutionary speed clocks. The sport wasn't just officially founded. It was legitimized, monetized, organized. Then came Lions. A former railroad yard, Lions Associated Drag Strip opened in 1955, founded by racing legend Mickey Thompson, who designed and built the first slingshot dragster and later broke the land speed record at Bonneville Salt Flats. In keeping with the NHRA's efforts to get racers off the streets and onto tracks, Lions' motto was direct: drive the highway, race at Lions. Manager Pappy Hart brought big league racing to Lions on Saturday and Sunday, with upwards of 250 all-out competition cars vying for money on Saturday nights and 400 or more stockers competing for trophies on Sunday. Wednesday was grudge racing, settling drive-in challenges on the strip, not the street. The traditional flagman who stood between 2 racing cars had been replaced with an electronic lighting system known as the Christmas tree. This was professionalization of rebellion, taking teenage defiance and street racing culture and packaging it for spectators, sponsors and safety regulations. The magazines were crucial. Robert Pete Peterson founded Hot Rod in 1948 and established the template for American car enthusiast publications, serving as both news services and repositories of how-to knowledge. As drag racing pioneer Sid Balkeen put it, the magazines were like the internet. They were the vehicle that reached people. If it hadn't been for Peterson, the industry wouldn't have gotten off the ground. Balkeen himself absorbed early knowledge from reading Hot Rod, which inspired him to start street racing his mother's Chevy when he was 15. This led to driving a nitro-powered Digger, a willowy, front-engine, purpose-built dragster for drag racing legend Ed Donovan. Eventually, Balkeen built his own top-fuel dragster, dubbed the Bantamweight Bomb because of the drilled chassis rails, and won races everywhere from Lions drag strip south of LA to Half Moon Bay near San Francisco. Companies like Edelbrock, which started during the Great Depression and expanded after the war, provided high-performance parts for the new hot rodders. Owners were no longer restricted to original equipment provided by manufacturers, helping create not only hot rod culture but also the foundation for cosmetic modifications. The creation and rapid expansion of the aftermarket made it possible for enthusiasts to personalize their automobiles. This was capitalism meeting creativity, commerce meeting rebellion. You could buy your conformity in the suburbs, then customize your way out of it in the garage. And when night fell, when those hot rods had been polished and tuned, when suburban families wanted entertainment that didn't require dressing up or finding a babysitter, they all ended up at the same place, the drive-in theater. The very first drive-in opened in 1933 near Camden, New Jersey, but Southern California was next at bat. The first LA drive-in sat at Pico and Westwood Boulevards, followed by the Sandval in the Burbank area. The concept didn't really gain traction until the advent of in-car speakers in the early 1940s. By 1958, the number of drive-ins peaked at 4,063 nationwide. Drive-ins started to really take off in the 50s. They offered family entertainment. People could sit in their cars, bring their babies, smoke. Drive-ins offered more flexibility than indoor theaters. Originally, the movie sound was provided by speakers on the screen, later replaced by individual speakers hung from the window of each car. The slogan for the first drive-in was direct. The whole family is welcome regardless of how noisy the children are. During the height of the drive-in movie theater boom between the mid-50s and mid-60s, there were more than 50 locations in the greater Los Angeles area alone, from Oxnard to Huntington Beach. Nearly all area theater companies included drive-ins in their screen count. Los Angeles's own Pacific Theaters, at one time a drive-in theater company only, eventually owned more than 110 locations. Michael Foreman, president of the family-owned Pacific, recalled, "Since we were actually located in Hollywood, the studios could not ignore us. We were able to get first-run product, and we utilized movie stars to promote the outdoor venue. We hosted huge premiere parties for drive-in showings. One evening I will never forget, a very young Raquel Welch appeared for the grand opening of our Fountain Valley location. This wasn't B-movie territory exclusively, though that would come later. In the golden age of the 50s, drive-ins got first-run films, celebrity appearances, premiere parties under the stars. They were legitimate cinema experiences, just outdoors and accessible. The car culture and film culture merged perfectly. Your automobile wasn't just transportation. It was your theater seat, your privacy pod, your status symbol on display in the parking lot. If you're loving this journey back to 1950s California, do me a favor right now. Drop a comment telling me which aspect fascinates you most. The suburban revolution? The hot rod culture? The drive-in experience? I read every single comment, and your input shapes future content. And if you haven't already, smash that like button. It tells the algorithm that people want more deep dives into the eras that shaped modern America. Let's keep this conversation going. The culture that emerged from this trifecta of suburbia, hot rods, and drive-ins wasn't accidental. It was the physical manifestation of post-war prosperity, teenage rebellion, and the American dream on four wheels. Diner culture complemented it perfectly. Chrome-clad diners dotted California, serving as social hubs where conversations flowed freely and jukeboxes played the latest hits. Burgers and milkshakes were the staples, and teenagers claimed these spots as their own. Crowds came for both the casual setting and affordable prices. The fashion was distinct and cinematic. Girls wore poodle skirts, saddle shoes, and cardigan sweaters, often accessorized with scarves tied around their necks or ponytails. Boys wore jeans, white t-shirts, leather jackets. The uniform was rebellion against the formal wear of their parents' generation, but also conformity within their own peer group. Everyone trying to look different in exactly the same way. Music tied it all together. Rock and roll was raw, energetic, matched the attitude of a generation ready to push back against the suburban conformity their parents embraced. Record shops, diners, and school dances blasted the latest hits. Local garage bands started popping up across neighborhoods. This was before the British invasion, before Motown fully exploded. This was the birth moment, when rhythm and blues merged with country and western, when Chuck Berry duck walked across stages and Little Richard pounded piano keys with the fury of someone who refused to be ignored. California teenagers absorbed it all, made it their soundtrack for cruising Pacific Coast Highway or making out in the back row of the drive-in. On July 17, 1955, Disneyland opened its gates in Anaheim and instantly became one of the most iconic destinations in California. This was Walt Disney's vision of controlled fantasy, of Main Street USA preserved in perpetuity, of tomorrow as imagined by yesterday. It fit perfectly with the suburban dream: clean, safe, wholesome, manufactured. You could live in your tract home, customize your hot rod, take your family to Disneyland on Saturday, and catch a double feature at the drive-in Saturday night. The whole ecosystem fed on itself. Surfing culture was developing simultaneously. Surfing wasn't new in the 1950s, but California gave it a cultural identity that stuck. The beaches of Malibu, Huntington, and Santa Monica became gathering points for a growing surf scene where young Californians rode longboards by day and lit bonfires by night. The style was as important as the skill: tanned skin, bleach blonde hair, a laid-back attitude that contrasted sharply with the rigid social expectations of suburban conformity. Fashion in 1950s California wasn't just about clothes. It was a statement of identity, a visual language that communicated which tribe you belonged to and which version of the California dream you were chasing. The aerospace industry boomed. Lockheed, Douglas Aircraft, North American Aviation, these companies weren't just building planes. They were building futures, employing thousands of engineers and factory workers who needed places to live, which fed the suburban expansion, which created more consumers for the drive-ins and diners and hot rod parts suppliers. It was a closed loop of prosperity and consumption, each element reinforcing the others. But here's what the postcards and magazine spreads didn't show: the cracks in the perfect facade. Those identical suburban homes were beautiful symbols of achieved prosperity, but they came with restrictive covenants. Many developments explicitly excluded Black families, Asian families, Latino families. The GI Bill that helped millions of white veterans buy those homes didn't work the same way for veterans of color. Banks engaged in redlining, systematically denying mortgages or charging higher interest rates based on neighborhood racial composition. The perfect suburbia was segregated suburbia. The hot rod culture, for all its rebellious energy, was predominantly white and male. The drive-ins were family-friendly, sure, but they were also make-out spots where teenage sexuality bumped against the decade's rigid moral codes. The same culture that produced sock hops and wholesome Disney entertainment also produced juvenile delinquency panic, congressional hearings about comic books corrupting youth, and the Hollywood blacklist destroying careers over suspected communist sympathies. The economic prosperity wasn't evenly distributed. 4 million babies were born yearly in America during the baby boom, and that surge transformed family life, created the largest generation in U.S. history, sparked growth in schools and industries. But it also created pressure. Women were expected to retreat from the workforce they joined during the war, return to domestic roles, find fulfillment in new appliances and child-rearing. The feminine mystique, as Betty Friedan would later call it, the problem with no name. Suburban isolation could be profound, especially for women trapped in those tract homes while husbands commuted to urban jobs. The Cold War paranoia was real. Those backyard fallout shelters weren't just quirky period details. They represented genuine fear that nuclear annihilation could arrive at any moment. Duck and cover drills in schools. Loyalty oaths. The execution of the Rosenbergs in 1953. The culture was simultaneously celebrating unprecedented prosperity and living under existential dread. The hot rod culture that seemed so rebellious was also being co-opted and commercialized almost immediately. What started as kids souping up jalopies in backyard garages became an industry with magazines, sanctioned racetracks, corporate sponsorships. The NHRA's mission to get racers off the streets and onto tracks was about safety, yes, but also about control, regulation, monetization. Rebellion that threatens nothing gets celebrated and sold back to you. The drive-ins eventually became associated with B-movies and X-rated films because indoor theaters had more flexibility with scheduling, could show one film 5 or 6 times a day instead of only at night. Movie studios sent first runs to indoor theaters, leaving drive-ins with whatever was left. Being naughty helped some drive-ins survive, but it also transformed their cultural role from wholesome family entertainment to something more marginal, more disreputable. By the 1970s and 80s, home video, cable TV, suburban multiplexes, and rising land costs would spell doom for most drive-ins. Of those 4,000-plus theaters that existed in 1958, only a few hundred remain today. The golden age was brief. The suburban dream had consequences beyond segregation and conformity. Sprawl became the dominant development pattern, creating car-dependent communities that couldn't function without automobiles. Public transportation withered. Downtown areas declined as retail and commerce followed populations to the suburbs. The freeway system that connected everything also cut through and destroyed established urban neighborhoods, often poor communities and communities of color. Urban renewal became a euphemism for displacement. The tract housing that went up so fast was often cheaply built, not designed to last generations. The environmental impact of suburban sprawl, the air pollution from all those cars, the loss of agricultural land and open space, these weren't considerations in 1950s California. Progress meant growth. Growth meant prosperity. Prosperity meant more of everything. More houses, more cars, more freeways, more drive-ins, more consumption. Yet despite all these complications, despite the myth-making and the marketing, despite the exclusions and the environmental costs, something genuine happened in 1950s California. A culture emerged that still shapes how we think about American life. The teenager as a distinct consumer category with their own tastes, their own money, their own cultural power. The car as extension of identity, not just transportation. The suburb as aspiration, the promised land of safety and ownership. The drive-in as communal experience that was simultaneously public and private. When we talk about the 50s today, we're usually talking about some version of California in the 50s. The images, the aesthetics, the cultural touchstones, they're disproportionately Californian. Grease isn't set in California, but it's channeling California energy. American Graffiti is explicitly about early 1960s Modesto, but it's documenting the tail end of 50s culture. Even Happy Days, set in Milwaukee, is really about California's exported vision of what the decade meant. The 1950s in California created templates we're still using: the masterplan community, the automotive aftermarket industry, the blockbuster entertainment destination, the teenager as rebel consumer. Panorama City became the model for suburban development that would spread across America and eventually the world. The hot rod culture became custom car culture, tuner culture, the entire automotive enthusiast ecosystem that generates billions in revenue annually. The drive-in might be nearly extinct, but the concept of car-based entertainment evolved into everything from parking lot tailgates to drive-through restaurants to the brief revival of drive-in movies during the 2020 pandemic. The machinery of that decade, the houses and cars and theaters, most of it is gone or transformed beyond recognition. But the cultural DNA persists. We're still chasing versions of that same dream. Ownership, mobility, entertainment, the ability to customize our lives and express our identities through consumption. We're still negotiating the same tensions: conformity versus rebellion, community versus isolation, progress versus preservation, inclusion versus exclusion. California in the 1950s was simultaneously the dream and the reality, the promise and the cost, the future and the fantasy. Those sheepherders watching construction crews in Panorama City in 1948 were witnessing something more profound than housing development. They were watching America build its post-war identity, one tract home at a time. The kids drag racing on the streets of Southern California before the NHRA channeled that energy into sanctioned tracks were acting out a ritual as old as humanity, testing limits, establishing hierarchy, creating meaning through risk and speed and the roar of modified engines. The families parked at the drive-in under the stars, children in pajamas in the back seat, teenagers sneaking into trunks to avoid admission fees, couples in cars steaming up windows in the back rows, they were all participating in something uniquely American. Entertainment as democracy, culture as commerce, public life lived privately in personal automobiles. You've made it to the end of this deep dive into the decade that built the California dream and exported it to the world. If this video gave you new perspective on the 1950s, on California, on how we got from there to here, then do 3 things for me right now. First, subscribe if you haven't already, because we're just getting started exploring the eras and cultures that shaped modern life. Second, share this video with someone who appreciates history, cars, or California culture. Conversations make content better, and I want to hear what this video sparked for you. Third, check the description for sources and further reading, because this story goes deeper than any single video can capture. The 1950s in California wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point, a collision of forces that created something new in human history. The suburbs, the hot rods, the drive-ins, they were all symptoms of the same phenomenon. America trying to figure out what to do with post-war prosperity, how to channel teenage energy, how to build communities in an age of automobiles and anxiety. We're still figuring it out. We're still living in the world that decade created. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.